And literally they track. This person asked about this watch, and then like they come in later, and knowing that it'd been a couple of years, they're like, well, if you want that watch, we might have it now for you. But if you want something other than that watch, like, no, you gotta buy this one first. Maybe that other one is like your second watch. Like, they're literally dictating what a customer can and can't do. And so I'm thinking about Rick going in there, knowing what he wants, and like, he was ready to spend the money, but because of this, honestly, stupid manipulation game that's insulting the intelligence and dignity of customers, he's probably not going to buy it. He's probably going to leave being like, what the hell? I was really ready to buy something right now, and they just convinced me that I can't. What is up with that?
Greetings and welcome to this week's aBlogtoWatch Weekly. We are joined by a slightly sleepy, but apparently recovering fast, David, fresh from Geneva Watch Days. How are you, David?
Good, thank you, Rick. Almost fully recovered, which is a good thing.
Excellent. And we're joined by Ariel, who is talking to us just before we went live, just before we started recording, about his adventures going to see the Barbie movie. However, have you seen Oppenheimer yet? Have you done the Barbenheimer?
Yes, I saw them both.
You saw them both at the same time?
Split screen.
One after the other?
No. Did not see it at the exact same time, no.
Okay, not exactly. In the same sitting, in the same cinema visitation, or did you spread them about?
No, it was Oppenheimer. A few weeks later, it was Barbie. I don't understand why people are putting these movies on the same footing. They're totally different.
They premiered on the same day.
I know, but people like to cause these associations like it's competition. Like, I don't think when they were making Barbie, they're like, this is going to do great against Oppenheimer.
It's only because the portmanteau works. Had they been called something different and you couldn't have joined the names together, like Brangelina, it would simply never have happened. It was only because you could run the names together in both directions. So it's as simple as that. The wonders of the English language.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Oppenheimer had watches. Obviously, they're like period, they're trying to be kind of like periody watches. So I don't know if there's a lot to say about that, but if you're really into vintage watches, yeah, there's some watch spotting in there. In terms of watches with Barbie, there's really like two principal things to say. One is that Mr. Gosling, of course, has that scene where he's wearing the 3 Tag Heuer watches.
Yep. And
this begins from a scene earlier in the movie where somebody asks him what time it is, and he doesn't know what to do. And so later, this is like him overcompensating, right? Because like someone asked him this, he has to wear 3 watches, and they are the 2 gold. Actually, I think they're all gold, but they're like 2 gold on bracelet Tag Heuers and the one Carrera on a strap. And then there's 2 characters that are wearing IWCs. So it makes you wonder, like, was IWC trying to get something in it? Because there was more than one IWC, and they were worn by characters where it's like, I wouldn't expect an IWC on that character, right? Like, it's, you know what I mean? Usually when it's like too expensive a watch for the status of the character in the movie, right? Like, that's just like a lowly intern. Why are they wearing a $30,000 chronograph, right? So there's that. But I thought it was actually oh, here it is. You're pulling it up. The
3 gold Tag Heuers at once.
Gosling is good in the movie. I'll say this: it was a very trippy, almost quasi psychedelic movie. I believe it was written as a stage musical. I don't think it was originally written as a movie. And it is very weird. As I said, is not a kids movie in my opinion at all. And it like sort of starts to play into current politics, and then it sort of creates sort of almost I don't know if it's a mockery, definitely a satire of certain, current issues. And what I wonder is, we know that Barbie will probably still be a property, 20, 30 years from now. When people see this movie 20, 30 years from now, they're going to think it's freaking weird. So this is like culty movie. Like, this is going to be one of those cult classics where people get highly inebriated and watch. But like, if you're looking for like a fun story to remember Barbie dolls, or to get girls into Barbie dolls, this is not this is not about that. It's a cool movie. I'm glad they made it. I'm really happy they made it. And once you start to see the multiple dance numbers that are awkwardly put in there, you'll know what I mean about this being a stage thing.
You're all about the dancing. Are you a musical theatre guy? Was this the calling that you missed when you went to watch Ariel?
Look, I mean, it's good to enjoy a good, musical movie, but I think we've all seen ones where the dance and song numbers feel like they were forced in there. Like, wait a minute, like, did they just try to throw a song in here? So that's why I almost call it trippy, because the visual parts of the dance numbers seem to be more important than the actual songs themselves, and why I think it looks as though it was originally meant to be like a Broadway musical. You guys will have to see it. Let me know.
I've just never been able to get on board with Ryan Gosling.
He's great in it. He's really great in it.
It's not just the poor man's Ryan Reynolds.
I mean, they're two different people. You know that, right?
I realise they're two different people, but is one just not the one you get when you can't get the other one?
Have they been in a movie together? I wonder what that chemistry would be like.
People.
Is that like
they've never been seen on a picture together?
I mean,
is it like Face Off?
Yes.
Or
they
Twins?
They both have a goofiness to it, but them for sure. But I'd say that Ryan Reynolds is more squarely the the comedic actor, where Gosling has his fair share of moody. Gosling does moody a lot better.
All right, okay. Well, Ryan's team won at the weekend, so again, shout out to Ryan Reynolds. Wrexham 1-0. Anyway,
has he responded ever?
He's never responded.
Well,
I mean, we're working on it.
He doesn't deserve you, Rick.
He doesn't. We keep on saying things about Omega. I suspect somebody's maybe like...
I feel like Gosling, just given the fact that he's a tag lawyer ambassador, has a higher likelihood of paying attention responding.
Possibly not that I've said that it's a cheap man's Ryan Reynolds. Maybe not.
Only
send
the
him
best
this
for this man here.
We'll reach out to Tag Heuer, and then I'll not be on that show, and we'll see how we go on. Hey, David just returned from Geneva.
Yes.
Did you spend any time watching television in your restful, or was it all party? No watches and movies?
No. I flew EasyJet. I'm really hooked on Mark Felton Productions, which is hyper focused on World War II documentaries and like 7 to 20 minute long videos. And the funniest part is like all of these videos start with this like trumpeting war music, like all of them like dum da 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 da. And just when the flight attendant came over to describe how or tell me how to open the door, like because I was sitting next to the emergency door, and this music just started playing like dum, dum. And I was like, oh, I'm in the mood now. And not many watches in those.
I have my emergency parachute strapped to me. I'm ready to open the door. Would you like it done
All
now?
good.
Or at 50,000 feet?
Perfectly prepared.
So, best watch you saw, because if I asked Ariel this and he wouldn't answer the question, but you might answer the question. Best watch you saw at Geneva Watch Days?
Wow. One of my favorites was the new HYT Conical Tourbillon, or Comical Tourbillon, I guess we could call it. It's hysterical. It's a multi-axis tourbillon that's lifted above the plane of the dial. It's just basically at the very top of the watch, which is what you're looking at. But they have attached these green little luminous globes or like bulbs to it. And yeah, this is what we're seeing here is the gold version, but there's like a black and green one. And the whole thing is just turning around like it's been possessed, or it has like, it looks very, very weird and basically organic in a way. To see this in action is very difficult to make any sense of whatsoever. And it's just cool that they have, this is not like a planetarium or anything like that as far as I understand it. It's just things sticking out of a tourbillon and spinning around constantly at different rates. So it's a very, very interesting sight for sure, but it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So this is the HYT Conical Tourbillon Infinity Sapphire watch. So this is not actually a planetarium of our solar system. It's just a random planetarium.
Not as I understand it, no. It's just the whole thing is spinning around at various speeds. Yeah, very cool. Very cool stuff.
Would you not have thought that the complexity of making such a thing as this, it would have just made sense to go the extra mile and make it reflective of our own solar system?
I'm not sure.
No, am I missing something?
I'm
here?
really not sure.
It does look like a lovely watch. I also thought the whole stick with HYT at the moment was they were going to try and make things simpler so that they could sell them more of them and they would break down less often. This appears to be going in the other direction.
They've done that with the H0, but the H0 is now discontinued. So there was a watch that HYT wanted to produce in relatively speaking higher numbers that was simplified in a way, but that's not in production at the moment. The company has been through a number of transitional periods, and it's good for cash flow if you can just pump some of these out and sell them for a couple 100,000 each.
Yeah. Ariel, what do you think of this?
Well,
next.
I mean, Look, if it was an actual planetarium, then when you pick this watch up, you'd actually have to set it. And that sounds like a grueling experience. So now you can put it on. You can imagine it's the planets, okay?
Uh-huh.
Doesn't actually matter where they'll be because the actual position of the planets doesn't actually affect anything. Sorry, people that think it does. And you can just imagine that you have power over the solar system there. So I actually think they did simplify it because you don't have to set it now and just a little bit of winding and boom, your eyes are happy.
But if they'd made it so that it was a real planetarium and you just decided not to set it, it would just be the same as this.
Yeah.
So you'd at least have the choice of, do I want to go through the hassle of setting this versus, oh, this reflects on nothing other than spinning jewels. It's just a bit odd. I mean, it looks absolutely stunning. Is it in any way practical to wear, David?
Not really. It's not hideously uncomfortable, but it's like 17 or 18 millimeters thick. It's basically a huge...
I like how this was your favorite watch.
It's weird.
You're like, I wouldn't wear it or anything. Can't afford it, wouldn't wear it, doesn't make sense. But you know what? Out of everything I saw, it's still the best.
Yes. You can't afford it. It doesn't make any sense. But that's what I like about it, because it's just so inexplicably polar. It's just for itself. It's just like, let's stick green little, like balls out of a tourbillon. Even described. How does it get any better than that? It doesn't. And it has fluid in it. It's just a cool thing.
I mean, last year the favourite was the Bulgari. What was the reflective one called?
Yes, the Sajima.
Oh, the mirror one?
The Sajima edition.
The Sajima, that's it.
That was hysterical.
So is this the equivalent of that?
No, it doesn't even come close. No, nothing comes close. I mean, I laughed myself to tears with the Sajima. It was so dumb in a way.
I was sitting beside you at the time.
Yes, but it's a fantastic watch. Bulgari had some interesting stuff. My favorite being their ancient Roman coin watches, two of them. One is about $650,000, very reasonable, and it's a dual time zone watch. That's basically a ribbon of gold and diamonds, and it's a secret watch in the sense that you have a lid that covers a rectangular watch case, and in that lid are installed two rare coins from like 2,000 years ago. And the reason why they are rare is because one of them is of an emperor, but the other one is of his wife, and that was very rare apparently for ancient Romans to put, anyone else other than themselves on coins. And so this is like a his and hers kind of thing. It's of course very romantic in the way that Bulgari looks at it. It's a high jewelry piece. And ever since I saw just the pictures of it, I wanted to see it. And luckily, I could get naughty a little bit and I could put it on my wrist, and it was just something fun to wear for sure.
Good stuff. And following on from the best watch of the show, what was the best watch you saw somebody wearing? What did you actually see out in the street?
Oh, that's a really good question. Not much. I couldn't. I have no such recollection.
In Geneva, saw no watches in the street.
I have absolutely no recollection. No. I just saw pretentious stuff. That's all.
David seems to like watches that go as far out of their way of being a watch as possible. Like David's in a very anti-watch mode. So he's like, there weren't enough people wearing absolute absurdities that barely, or maybe ideally don't sell the time.
Yes, wrist absurdities. That's what I'm after.
Wrist absurdities. Well, I think that deserved its own new section in the show, David's wrist absurdities. For later on. Good stuff.
Here's another one, because we can't let this pass. It's like Urwerk had to have their only watch piece present, because the only watch people in their infinite wisdom decided to put all the watches on their world trip just for the week, right on the week of Geneva Watch Days. So everyone was quite mad about that, understandably, because it's just stupid to put all these special creations when, half of the world is in Geneva Watch Days from the industry anyway, to take pictures of it, and then they're somewhere else on their way to LA or wherever for a weird exhibition. Anyway, because Urwerk's space is so large and fragile, they couldn't ship it anywhere. So they could just transport it from one end of Geneva to another. And they rented this villain's suite in the Bory Watch, which, is a place I've never been to. It's like at the top floor of the Bory Watch. It's huge. And in the middle of it, there was this big, like 300 kilo marble coffee table. And in the middle of it, there was this standing Nixie clock that had like, I don't know, like 6 foot long, like, or 6 foot tall, like 2 meters tall, or however tall it was. And it features a number of Nixie tubes that display all kinds of stuff, weird stuff. You know, of course, it displays the time and the day, but then it gets really weird with like the distance of the sun, or like how far the Earth has rotated that day, or the people you have taken advantage of to get to the point where you can afford something like this. So it's like, it's really weird. It really was like a genuine villain's clock, which was very cool.
I killed this many people on the way here.
The genocide counter.
Genocide counter is exactly what it is. Urwerk are very fine people, and it's they can't really choose their customers, can they? And who knows who buys this clock? But I was looking at it and I was thinking to myself, if I were to buy this, I would just bid $1 million right away. If it sells for anything less than $1 million, I will have been disappointed by humanity. I mean, this clock has to sell for a cool $1 million. If you cannot say that you bought it for $1 million, it just loses so much of the effect that it can have potentially.
What did you pay for your clock? $1 million.
But then it has to display that on the tubes, right? You have to program them in there, so you can ask the question. You're like, how much should I spend on this? And then, like, as a party trick, you're like, oh, look, it says it right there.
It can display $1 million and the dollar sign. Yes.
Has it got enough digits? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, it has got eight digits.
Yes.
They'll figure out a way. They're Urwerk. What can't they do?
So, to explain to people who haven't seen this, imagine a lightsaber that's 6 foot long, stood on its end, and with where the light would be, there being these Nixie tubes that are stacked on top of each other. That's basically what this looks like.
The remote it comes with is actually shaped like a lightsaber, and it's like 5 pounds heavy. It's like 2 kilos. It's from brass. It's very heavy. It's as long as your forearm, and it has 2 buttons on it to cycle through the displays, and that's it. And it literally looks like an actual lightsaber. That's all.
I remember my granny used to have one of those TVs, and it just had 2 buttons on the remote control. In 1980s, and it was just an up and a down, yes. And that was it. It's just a bit like that. Good stuff. Well, that's some humour from Urwerk. Ariel, actually, before we go on to Ariel, something you want to talk about, just because we touched on it last week, Swatch are already trolling the watch internet with their 50 Fathoms-esque, we think, Blancpain moon swatch. I don't know, what we're going to call it. It's going to be a Swatch pain. I don't know. What the portmanteau for this new release is going to be. Thoughts, comments, feelings on what's on its way in the 9th?
I called it a while ago. The only collaboration Swatch Group will do is with themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And they're going to go through the watches that they think are like the popular icons, and they're going to make plastic versions out of them. They were the Speedmaster. It'd be silly to do the exact same thing with Omega and another thing. So if you look at the collection, what are those watches that are safe enough to make a plastic version of that you couldn't possibly, mistake the price point? And it's the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. That really is, in a lot of ways, a logical next step here. The 50 Fathoms is like minimum like a $10,000 watch, especially in the nicer ones. We don't know if they'll go with the more modern blocky hand version, or the more traditional version that has the more sword style hands, a little bit more elegant in my opinion. It's kind of unclear, but it looks to be that they're definitely doing something like that. And I think what's important is they've made it clear through this teaser that it's not just going to be Omega, right? It's going to be something else with Swatch. We're going to wait, what is it? The 9th of September. I'm glad they're doing some teasing campaign here, but again, I think they think that they're going to strike gold again, and I'd like to see what they do. I've loved the 50 Fathoms for a long time. I don't know if your average person out there knows anything about it. You can't say things like, that was the astronaut watch. I don't know how they're going to make the 50 Fathoms sexy to anyone outside the small number of people that know, like, scuba diving history.
I think this is the first thing that makes sense in this whole campaign in this whole production. I mean, it made sense, the Moon Swatch, because it just made a lot of money, but I didn't feel it made that much sense for the brand that they were pastiching. This does make sense because they can now take the benefit of selling all of these Moon Swatches to people who aren't necessarily straightforward watch geeks and introduce them to a brand that the non-watch geeks probably never heard of. And that is actual proper marketing, using something to, uplift something else that you own. It's just a question as to whether they'll make a decent watch or not, whether it'll be the same price point or whether this is also going to see some price creep, Is a 50 Fathoms more expensive than a Speedmaster? Yes. So will this be more expensive than a Moon Swatch? Will this just creep up, or are we still going to be in the $400, $300, $500, and will it have gold on it? What are they going to do, to then uplift this in 6 months' time with gold hand? Because they can't say that they did it during a full moon, because the moon bears no... They're going to say, well, we made this gold hand underwater in the Marianas Trench, and this is how we're going to
Sign me up.
Adding some more revenue to this. Sign you up.
I think it's going to be about the same price, because look, it's not going to be a chronograph, but it is going to be water resistant, right? So I think that's just kind of equal itself out. And that's one of the things that Swatch has not done in a very, very long time, is come out with anything that could even be thought of as a diving watch. There was the Swatch Scuba, but I don't personally remember any beach or dive style watches from the brand for a long time. Kind of funny because it's thoroughly the end of summer in most places, but it's still hot very many places. So you'd think that with a dive watch, it'd be a little early on, but again, maybe they'd not be considering that because they know, that the colors can be kind of timeless. So I think that this is going to be the sort of the dive watch platform. So you have the chronograph platform. Now you're going to have the classic looking dive watch platform, which I think could be good. And I think the people at Swatch are probably excited because they're thinking just like you said, Rick, oh, finally people are going to hear about Blancpain. So they're wondering oh, is this going to be free advertising for this brand that no one's heard about, and we get to go another 20 years without paying anything for advertising? I think that's why they're excited by it. But I think when we see the product, this is probably what's going to happen. We can test it. We're all going to be yeah, that's what I thought it was going to be.
Maybe they just called Omega and said, we need the Seamaster too, and they were hell no, we are not giving that to you.
No. Okay, so let's have a guess. What level of water resistance is this going to have? What do we honestly think Swatch consider to be water resistant?
100 meters?
Any advance in 100 meters, David?
I think it would be fun if it was 50 fathoms. That's 91 meters. So they could just say it's 50 fathoms. How else can you make people understand what the heck of a fathom is?
You're getting real intellectual there, David. I don't know if they're able to do that.
I think that's probably the clearest bit of marketing thought that anyone's ever had for this brand recently, and it's almost certainly not going to be what they do. I think there's going to be a stupid chance that they bring this out with 30 meters water resistance, and they present that as being, yes, water resistant 30 meters. So I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's all going to blow up in a few days' time, nonetheless.
Hi, I'm Ariel Adams, founder of aBlogtoWatch, with a message from eBay, a platform I probably use daily. Make sure your watches are the real deal with eBay Authenticity Guarantee. I believe it's the first and best service of its kind that protects your luxury purchases and checks each watch individually at eBay's highly reputable authentication partner, Stolen Company, in the United States. From band to bezel, their authenticators ensure each wristwatch matches the eBay listing and is the real deal. Authenticity Guarantee is also very fast. Once authentication is complete, your watch is securely delivered via rapid 2-day shipping. Surprisingly, eBay's Authenticity Guarantee service is free for all watches priced $2,000 and up. No one should buy a luxury item without an Authenticity Guarantee. Do what I do and check eBay before each watch purchase, because everyone deserves real.
Ariel, you had a topic you wanted to deal with this week. We're actually recording on a Monday, so we don't have our normal Monday chat. So Ariel, give us your, I think this is possibly based on what's been happening with Rolex and Bucherer. But give us your intro.
It's related to that topic. It's something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I'm writing a new article about it. And the article really explores what a world without any or as many third-party authorized dealers look like. We see mainly the corporate groups moving away from retail. Now, they've been trying to do this since, I think, the late 1990s, and we've seen successively over time the push to go into retail, only to temporarily abandon it and then sort of look at it again and then abandon it and look at it again. And it's all the groups in some way or another are doing this a little bit. Richemont has been the one that has done it the most. And there's this sort of, again, a push out there for brands to sell watches direct. And I wanted to explore, well, if they did that, what would be some of the unintended consequences? And I think that's really interesting to discuss. Now, let's first ask why they're doing it. The groups that are doing this, the companies you see that are mostly pushing to do their own sales, sort of fall into one of two situations. First, you have like the Audemars Piguets of the world, who have found that when they sell direct and they completely control the selling environment, they get to play games with consumers. They get to sort of like string them along for a while before they buy something. To make a long story short, they've created what they call a brand experience, but it's a relationship strategy they have, which is designed to get you to buy a certain number of watches over time, sort of according to the way they want to do it. And you can't have that type of agreement when you have a third-party authorized dealer. The second situation is more related to what I call margin capture, and that is really just about them making more money per purchase. And the push to do this by the corporate-owned companies is huge. You've seen over the past 20 years at least this incredible momentum and desire to want to sell direct in order to make the most money per watch. And I've been thinking a lot about why, because what we know is that when they actually do this, when they actually go ahead and have their store, they find that it's actually a lot harder to sell in most instances than with a third-party dealer, but they keep doing it. And why I think it is related to the shareholder price. Now, we know these companies are viciously protective of their shareholder price, and LVMH, Richemont, and Swatch Group are all publicly traded on some stock market somewhere, and they're all not all created equal. But when you sell direct, you get to make forecasts which make investors very happy. It's not real, but they get to make forecasts. So sort of let me explain. If you have watches sold in third-party dealers, your forecasts have to show all the money you wouldn't have otherwise made because you have to share it with somebody. But if you have all your own stores and you make up all these future sales, you also get to say that we get to keep a lot of money. So when you're trying to show shareholders promises of growth, or if you want to sell the exact same number of watches but show that you're making a little bit more money, then you go the route of selling direct. So my belief at this point is that most companies, the corporate-owned ones, in attempt to protect the share price at all costs and make them look like they're growing at all costs, they are getting rid of a network of entities that help them sell more watches than they would otherwise. So what I'd like to do for the next couple of minutes is explore what are some of the unintended consequences, of your opinion, of a world where most of the watches are sold directly from the brands.
I think a lot of us, when we're speaking about this sort of question, will immediately look at the automotive world and look at what's happened there in terms of things like, the process and journey they've been on for like authorized used sales, etc., about trying to get everything to go through main dealers rather than, used dealers, or effectively the grey market.
Can I ask you a question? This is really important. In America, at least until recently, by law, car companies were not also allowed to own the dealerships. It was seen as monopolistic, and there's third parties. So all the dealerships are privately owned, at least in America. Is it different where you live?
There is a good question. So I think of all the ones I deal with, all of the car ones I can think of are owned by third parties, But on a number of occasions, the buildings that those third parties operate from are owned by the brands. So, for example, you may sell via a dealer X, but actually the building that they're selling out of belongs to Audi or Volkswagen or
and
Jaguar.
And that loophole is allowed? No one closed that up?
It's certainly the case. Whether it's allowed, it's certainly what happens.
Oh my gosh.
And I think there was a period maybe 10, 15 years ago where a lot of money was spent on building and renovating showroom stock. So you went from the kind of old-fashioned asbestos-roofed car dealerships to, acres of glass and glazing and posh offices, whereby it looked more like a shopping centre than it did a car showroom. On the truck side and the bus side, certainly the brands do own some of, and the heavy equipment, the brands do own, as far as I'm aware, some of the sales, so they are more vertical integrated, but there are still third parties involved in that, so it's a bit of a mix. I don't know if it's a legal restriction in terms of the cars, but I can't think of any near me whereby it's the brands that are actually operating. What's the situation in Europe, David?
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I was trying to draw the parallel with the car world, maybe tech. We really couldn't tell. For sure, brands have all kinds of leverage on the 80s anyway. Whether they own the property or not, it's still the case.
Yeah. I think in the car world, I would draw the closest comparison to the likes of, in this country, Land Rover, whereby they're such popular cars that they sell themselves, or have for a long time sold themselves. As soon as there was one available, somebody was in there trying to buy it. The salespeople didn't need to know how to sell a car over any other model. So what happened over 5-10 years is those salespeople became less and less engaged in what was going on in the rest of the automotive world, knew less about what was happening, were trained less, were probably paid less, were fundamentally less into their cars. And now that in this country there's effectively a recession and people who sell expensive things actually need to be able to sell it over choosing something else, they're the ones that are starting to struggle. You can tell when you go into these showrooms and you ask them questions that the consumer is far more educated than the seller. And I think that is the main risk of watch brands selling their own product. I think my experience of going into brand-owned boutiques is the knowledge, even of the brand they're selling, is so much less than going into a multi-brand or even a mono-brand boutique that's operated by someone whose sole company purpose is to sell watches. I think it's just a completely different mindset. So that would be my observation.
Okay. David, what do you think are some of the consequences of a world where there's none or very, very little third-party watch retail?
One of the things I can think of is that, when you say third-party, there isn't anymore. Do you mean that it would just be mono-brand boutiques, or groups could still operate multi-brand within their groups?
I mean, you're right. Both of them are feasible. I think the idea is that, the company itself is responsible for the entire retail experience.
Right. That's interesting. I personally like to go to multi-brand boutiques if there's experienced sales staff who know, all kinds of different brands from all kinds of different groups, and maybe, of course, some independents as well. I think that you would have to rely so much more on sources outside of the sales staff there, to make your decision. I'm not sure that it would lead to an improved customer experience in the end.
One of the things that I realize is very, very important is what both of you touched on, which is demand generation. Richard, you said that during the sort of good economic times, sort of ish, the products themselves have such a high demand that the perception that a highly paid retailer is necessary goes away. They're like, wait a minute, we can just have a point of sale. We don't need a heavily paid, trained person. We can have a robot doing this. but we recognize that the demand needs to come from somewhere, right? So if the customer is already going to the store, already knowing that they want it, they're not just sort of born wanting Land Rover. There is mostly media. In fact, it's probably not advertising, but there has been some type of cooperation that Land Rover was good at that led to the demand creation. It wasn't just them. And I think that's sort of very, very important, is no matter what creates the demand for your watches, it's not going to be just you. Let's look at Audemars Piguet, for example, which I think is a really good example. They got very good at the celebrity angle, okay? It was the celebrities. It was those experiences. Yes, of course, they had to be clever with how to do it and develop a lot of relationships. But Audemars Piguet kind of sat to the side while these famous athletes and a variety of people from all different walks of life basically made the demand for them by wearing it. And they're like, oh, we don't need anyone. Sometimes it's the retailer. Sometimes it's us as media. In fact, many brands, their popularity comes from the enthusiasm that they see by the professionals in the space like us, as well as the legions of fans who maybe echo our sentiments or say the same things or even talk about things that we're not even talking about. But at the end of the day is the demand requires externalities. So when you don't have those third-party retailers who are sitting there ideally excitedly talking about your product and trying to sell it, where's the demand going to come from? And I think the burden is so much bigger. In a sense, that's good for us because that means media will be needed more and thus will be more money going to it. But it's funny how brands, they're not usually very good about demand creation in general unless they spend huge amounts of money. Where do we think the demand is going to come from, or what do we think our role is going to be when the third-party retailer is going along with this trend that we're on right now, going to be much diminished?
I mean, we know as geeks that Rolex is not fundamentally the best watch that you could buy at its individual price points. There are better watches, but they don't have the resale value, they don't hold the price, they're not as well known to everybody else, they don't have the same kudos, all the other fluffy stuff that Rolex has created. And I wonder if you could somehow reset the market to zero such that none of that fluffiness that existed around Rolex actually existed. Would your average Rolex retailer be able to sell you a Rolex if they're in a multi-brand boutique surrounded by everything else? Because when I go into these boutiques, and they're all great experiences, don't get me wrong, but that's because effectively they've already sold me the thing. If the thing happens to be there, I'm going to buy it if that's what I've gone in for. So they don't need to do the selling bit. What they need to do is the fluffy stuff, the champagne, the treat you nice, treat you like royalty, whatever. And what you see in a lot of these boutiques is they're actually more invested in making sure that there's somebody, that this is maybe just a Scottish thing, they actually spend more time making sure that there's somebody in that boutique that can speak French, that can speak Mandarin, that can speak Korean, that is from America, so that whoever is going in from the tourist trap can actually speak to someone in their own lingo or with their own kind of cultural context. And the brands actually are investing more in that than training them as to what a helium escape valve actually does or why it's completely unnecessary. And so I wonder if you could remove all the fluffiness around some of these brands, would the kind of people that have been employed actually be able to sell you the watches? Now, that obviously doesn't just apply to the Audemars Piguets who are mono brand owning their own boutiques, but applies to the big retail groups and who they employ to sell their watches. So I do wonder what would happen if you could kind of what was that movie about that everybody forgot what the Beatles were?
I know that one. Yeah, that was recent.
So if you could have that kind, maybe that's what we should create. Maybe we should pitch a thing to HBO or Disney Plus. Here's a movie where everyone has forgotten who Rolex are, and now only one person knows.
I got a comment here because you said some really important things there. And the mono-brand boutiques are oftentimes set up to sell watches based upon them being watches. And the problem is that people buy watches to feel good. Many third-party retailers understand that. When you go to buy a car, yes, you're buying a car because you need to feel good, but you have other utilitarian purposes and things like that. Buying a watch, unlike buying a toilet, is exclusively to feel good. So mono-brand boutiques, because they're trained by the company that make watches, they're trained to sell watches. When in reality, that's not what you're selling. What you're selling is an experience that lets someone feel good. And the third-party retailers, often because they're local and they pop up, where they live, they know what locals like. They know what makes them feel good. They know how to listen and hear when someone says, I want to feel good. If only there was some expensive piece of jewelry that could do that for me. They get all that. Whereas I routinely find in the mono-brand boutiques, no matter how smart or sophisticated the people who work there are, their job is to sell the brand. And they just, they kind of fumble through it. And we've seen these situations where someone in your position, Rick, goes in there, knowing what they want, but they want the experience too. And what I translate that into is they want their money to be valued. They want to feel like their business is welcome there and that they're going to be made to feel good that they're dropping their money here as opposed to some other place, right? Because as consumers, we've been taught a long time ago, if you use your money, all the places that you can use your money, you're going to be like poor tomorrow, okay? You have to make sure to only spend your money on things that you need or that make you feel good. We know this. Every customer around the planet inherently knows this. Yet the watch brands play this game in a sadistic way to try to dangle watches ahead of you. I was talking to someone recently that went to an Audemars Piguet store. I don't want to talk about what store or where. Maybe they'll hear this and know what they're talking about. But this they hadn't bought an Audemars Piguet, but Audemars Piguet has a CMS now, a customer management system that they ask you, what's your name? And literally they track this person asked about this watch. And then they come in later and knowing that it'd been a couple of years, they're like, well, if you want that watch, we might have it now for you. But if you want something other than that watch, no, you got to buy this one first. Maybe that other one is like your second watch. They're literally dictating what a customer can and can't do. And so I'm thinking about Rick going in there, knowing what he wants. And he was ready to spend the money. But because of this, honestly, stupid manipulation game that's insulting the intelligence and dignity of customers, he's probably not going to buy it. He's probably going to leave being like, what the hell? I was really ready to buy something right now, and they just convinced me that I can't. What is up with that? And I think they're going to have more and more and more of that, rather than the dumb new money. I don't know what else to call it. People aren't dumb. They just, you don't see these things coming. You're not trained to be manipulated by the staff at the high-end boutique. And so other than these types of schemes, I don't really see what it is that the mono brands have that makes them more successful. So I understand that more margin is trying to be captured, but I feel like there's more reasons why not to go direct than to go direct.
Yeah. And fundamentally, I think there's a lot to be said if you are successful enough that you're spending a shed load of money on a watch. And we're talking the 10 grand, the 20 grand, the 30,000 plus. Then there's something to be said for being able to go into a watch boutique that's owned by a family or a small chain and have a relationship with the owner of that chain, because you're in business, you own your own business, you're going in, and there's something, I can think of 3 or 4 chains in Scotland where I have a relationship with a person that owns the company that sells the watches, and you ain't ever going to get that in a selling point whereby it's owned by the brand back in Geneva or wherever. And I think when it comes to the big money, people buy from people at the top end, the real top end stuff. They don't buy from companies, or at least they don't necessarily buy from companies. But there we go.
This is a huge issue, and it's becoming more and more relevant as more and more people aren't finding the watches that they want at the dealers they used to be at. And when they're going to where the watches are, the experience is so strange or off-putting at times that sometimes people just completely write off the entire brand. So, I mean, this is an ongoing conversation, but I would very much like to know what people think, what their own opinions are. Maybe you've had experiences one way or another, but what do you think would happen in a world where most of the watches you buy, you can only buy somehow direct from the brand?
Well, if you're listening on Spotify, then go and check the Q&A section whereby you can put in your responses. We'll publish this as a question, and you can also put in a response to your own hit, miss, and maybes, or email the show podcast at aBlogtoWatch.com. We have 5 minutes left. You're also going to hear a little advert for some Red Bar stuff. Now, this is just a little service we're going to offer here, that if you have your own little watch meetup, so this isn't for Red Bar, this is just for Kevin and his crew down south. You'll hear their little show that they're putting on. But if you're anywhere in the world and you're a group of enthusiasts and you're hosting a little event, then send us in some audio and we'll play it. And you can communicate your message to the rest of the world about the little watch event that you're having.
Greetings, Rick and aBlogtoWatch team. This is Kevin from Red Bar Southeast. This is to let your many UK listeners know that we at Red Bar Southeast have taken the initiative to present a first-of-its-kind event, a celebration of British watchmaking and design. We have organised an event called The Best of British Watches. This event is taking place on the 16th of September in Brighton, in a hotel on the beachfront from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. The watch brands taking place are Anne Ordain, Christopher Ward, Elliot Brown, Farah, Fears, Helicon Watches, Isotope, Schofield Watches, Studio Underdog, Vertex, William Wood, and Zero West. Attendees will have the opportunity to speak with the brands and get hands-on with the current collection from the brands, as well as new releases that will be shown in the metal for the first time. Throughout the day, there will also be a number of Q&A panels and the chance to win various prizes from the brands. To attend this free event, all you have to do is email redbarsoutheast@gmail.com, spelt redbarse@gmail.com, for further information and access to a free ticket. Rick, it's a shame you cannot make it, as we would love to show you our proper southern hospitality.
Okay, we're going to do a very quick round of hit miss maybe, because David and Ariel are on short time. They need to go onto a call. It means we might get a really short hit miss maybe from Ariel. So here we go. We're going to try it single answers only. Okay, new release Armin Strom 1 week first edition watch. Ariel, hit miss maybe.
Movement hit. Case and bracelet, maybe.
See, he's still time restricted and is still giving more than one answer. David, hit miss, maybe. I think it's a maybe for me as well. Just looks a bit too busy for my liking. Okay, H. Moser and MBMF Streamliner Pandemonium for Only Watch 2023. Give us a hit miss, maybe, and a price that it will sell for. Ariel, hit miss, maybe, and a price.
Maybe. I've seen this before where they make these little characters. It's cool. I think it's like a relatively easy thing for them to do. Just sort of. I wasn't super artistically impressed, but I think it will sell for a lot because it is one of those concepts. Price, I don't know, million. Who knows?
Million, that's fine. We're just Ariel's standard answer is just a million. That just gets me off his back. David, hit miss, baby.
And 300,000.
Hitting a 300,000. I love this. Who doesn't want a panda on their dial? It's a panda dial.
Doesn't get any more panda than this.
Listen to the jokes, folks.
Try even seeing it. Imagine you're going to wear the watch. You're going to spend all this money. I'm like, there's a panda on there. Someone's like, really? You're like, yeah, look really, really close.
It's going to be like that gorilla playing basketball. There'll be people that buy this watch that don't notice it's got a panda on it until somebody points it out. They're busy trying to rub it off. Yeah, this is a hit. This is going for more than a million. So 1.2, let's say. Okay, Jaeger LeCoultre spices up the Polaris chronograph. Whenever you have to tell somebody that's what you're doing, I'm not sure, but spice up the chronograph with new movements and a lacquer dial. Ariel, hit miss maybe on something newish from JLC.
I do like that they tried to spruce it up a little bit, but I've never been a fan of the underlying collection. It's been very boring for me, so it's still a miss despite them trying to spruce it up.
David, hit miss maybe.
Same, miss.
See, I really like these, so I'm just going to say I really like them. I'm going to make it a hit. That's just as simple as that. Okay, 2 more left to do, and then we'll release these guys to their meeting. New release, Angelus Chronodate Titanium Storm Blue watch. David, hit miss maybe.
It's a hit for me. I love Angelus very much. Cool,
yeah,
please.
Same here. Hit from me. I think actually now that I see this in light of the previous JLC, the JLC is a miss, and this is a hit. You'd buy this. You'd buy this every day. Ariel?
It's a hit. It's a very nerdy watch. The Chronodate, I don't know what it is. It's just it's like it's one of the coolest nerd watches you can wear. So like it's a niche watch, but it is a hit.
And our final, and this is also a niche chronograph. David, you reviewed this. Go check out the review at blogtowatch.com. A duo of Mont Blanc Star Legacy Nicholas Riasek monopusher chronograph watches. David?
Biggest hit. It's fantastic. Great value for money. Very cool movement. Cool history to this space. It's just fantastic. It's one of the best chronograph values out there. And the Nicolas Riasek Mont Blancs.
Excellent. Ariel?
Also a hit. I love how underdog these watches continue to be. I mean, it's almost as though if like too many people liked it, I'd be like, nah. But because not enough people really understand it, and Mont Blanc has been refining these for so many years, you get, as David said, like a really refined platform. It's very cool. It's affordably priced, and it's not that in demand.
Yep, I agree. You can
I just wanted to add that this is like 8,300 and the Jaeger is 13 something. And this has a truly bespoke chronograph movement, like proper.
No, if you're going to buy a chronograph and you've not got the money that everyone seems to be charging for their expensive chronographs, this is where to go. It's a great watch, absolutely stunner. So a big hit from me. That is us for this week then. There may be a little interview that you might hear just after this, so do stay tuned. There'll be a slight tweak to some formats. So if you plug into your podcast player and see that the podcast looks like it's an hour and a half long, then don't worry, it's not just us speaking for an hour and a half. It will be because we have put a short interview at the end, so keep an eye out for that happening from time to time. But other than that, it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from them.
Thanks guys.
Thanks,
see you next
bye,
time.
Everyone.
Hey everyone, Ripley Sellers with a blog to watch. I'm joined today by Linden Lazaraus from Oliver and Clarke. Linden, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, we met through a mutual, connection in the watch industry, and we both live in Los Angeles. But, I'm familiar with your company, but only just met you this year.
Sure.
And you have a pretty interesting story, so I wanted to get you on the podcast and, kind of let you tell it to our listeners a bit. Now, I'm in my early 30s, and I often get called, a young person within this industry, but you make me look really old. You've bought dozens and dozens, potentially hundreds of six-figure or more, Grail watches. Yet, are you now yet old enough to actually buy a beer?
Not yet, unfortunately, although the date is approaching very quickly.
Okay, yeah, I knew we were we were getting there, but watches are a lot more mainstream. Even in the time that I've been working within it, a lot more people are, luxury watches are much more, on people's radar, and, social media has definitely helped with that. But you've been at this a long time, and what you've built with Oliver and Clarke is a far cry from, a lot of what other people are doing, where it's kind of, that really hustle of, the quick turnover watches, and they might have like a kiosk somewhere in the jewelry district. You have a really well-built, vintage dealer with some really high-level pieces, a gorgeous showroom, which, even has a bar, which I'm sure you've got to have one of even one of your employees stocking.
I can't wait to partake in a few months,
But how did you get started? Because this isn't something that you built overnight. And I think what's even more interesting is it's not like someone just handed you a boatload of cash and said, well, go build an established business. This is something that's been self-funded and that you've literally grown over years. So I guess start at the beginning and, in short, just kind of give us the short format, how you first got into watches, when that was, and, how did you take it from there to here?
Yeah, so I've been interested in watches and in other kind of mechanical, analog, artisan, craftsman things for a long time, probably, since I can remember. But the passion for watches really started probably when I was around 13 or 14. I became enamored with watches, with the design behind them, with mechanical aspect, the history. And I really got my first kind of taste of watches when I was 14 and I headed to London with my father. It was my first time out of the country, and we were going for a typical kind of touristy trip. We were there supposed to be there for a week. The first day we got in, I know we immediately walked past, because we were near our hotel, the Watch and Switzerland boutique in London, which is probably one of the most magnificent, grandiose watch shop in the world. 3 levels, tens of thousands of square feet of retail space. And we ended up spending probably the entire day there. Probably from open to close, we were looking at watches. Probably with no expectation we're going to buy anything. Nobody in my family is into watches. My father, who accompanied me, not a watch guy. I still beg him to take off his Timex. But I kind of fell head over heels on watches in London and spent pretty much the rest of the trip going to different arcades, the Burlington arcade notably, to look at some of these pieces. And at the end of that trip, I knew that I needed to do something. I didn't know quite what that was, whether that was buy a watch or sell a watch or design a watch or build a watch or write about watches, but I knew something in watch calling. Sometimes you just know something's right, and I just knew something was right at that moment. So probably 8 months later, I had saved up some money. This was my life savings, I believe, $2,800. And I said, I'm going to buy a watch. I actually picked a pretty interesting watch in retrospect to set my eyes on, which was a kind of an early 2010s IWC Agenor, which, a fantastic Genta design. I was really enamored by, both the Royal Oaks and Nautilus and some of other, Gerald Genta's designs. Obviously couldn't afford those 2 big ones. So I thought that the Agenor might be my ticket to some Genta design for a much lower price. I think they were probably $4,000. And I remember for probably 6 months, I would search on eBay every day to find one, and I would offer $2,800, all my money. It wasn't truly a negotiating tactic. It was more so that this was every cent in my bank account, and I was willing to spend it on this watch if I could get it. And so of course, nobody accepted my offer for the first probably 6 months, and after 6 months, I was very lucky, and someone thankfully accepted my offer, which was fantastic. I got the watch in. It was gorgeous. I wore it for probably 6 months. And one day I was like, look, I want to move on. I want to buy something else. And I sold it. I bought it on eBay. I put it back on eBay. And I remember I sold it. And I netted, after eBay fees and such, $3,600, which was $800 more than I paid. And as a 15-year-old who had, not done more than odd job in the summers, this was all the money in the world to me. Holy shit. I owned this watch for 6 months. I enjoyed the heck out of it, and I made $800. And that's kind of when it hit me that selling watches could be a possibility. Although it is not near as in the mainstream as it is today. It wasn't apparent that watch dealers or being a watch dealer was a job, and or that you could make real money doing it. Obviously, there were a couple people writing about watches, and there were some people that made videos, but it was a pretty sparse community, watch dealers that made online content for the world to see. So I had an idea that, look, I think I can buy these watches and sell them. I was spending all my days just looking at watches, probably at some point, 8, 12 hours a day, scrolling on Instagram, scrolling on eBay, scrolling on Hodinkee, all of these kinds of, aBlogtoWatch, all of these kinds of sites that gave me education, because watches were, kind of all consuming at this point in my life. And so after that, I started the business when I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school. And it was supposed to be a little, kind of fun project that I was working on. My end goal then was to sell a few watches, have fun, maybe make a little bit of money, but really money was the far less of the goal. The real goal was to own these watches, to be able to own them and pass them along and sell them and own more. Just because I really wanted to experience this stuff. There's one thing about going into a boutique and looking at a watch, but it's very, very different to hold something in your hand and to live with it, have it on your wrist through day and night. And it's a very different experience. So I really craved that experience, and Oliver and Clarke initially was kind of my outlet to get me there. After I started the business when I was 15, for 3 or 4 months, I sold absolutely zero watches. I had made an Instagram account, a website. I had spent all my $4,000, which was truly all of my money. on these watches. I was now, dead broke, which is not too terrible for a 15-year-old going to school, but still something to note. And for 3 or 4 months, I sold no watch. Eventually, probably 4 months later, I bought my first sale, and I remember running down to some of my friends who were watching. I remember the ASC championship game for the Patriots. My school was in Maine, so all those guys were Patriots fans, and I remember running downstairs and going, "Oh my God, I sold a watch!" And I remember initially nobody believed me. I didn't sell a watch. It was really a kind of a small time side project I was working on, although I was working, probably more hours than I was doing homework on watches. So from there, I ended up selling that first watch, selling a couple more after that. And then that summer, I kind of dropped into the world of 47th Street. I found my way there. I had made a couple connections from buying and selling some watches, and was really lucky to be able to have some incredible mentors that kind of helped me through the process of learning, both about business, about watches, about life. And it was a pretty transformative summer. I talk about all the time that I learned more in that summer, buying and selling watches than most people would learn at business school. And I got up, and I was off the street at 8 a.m. I probably wouldn't get home till 10 p.m. I would take the train in. And it was a pretty wild life for that summer. And I remember looking back after that summer was over and saying, look at the money that I accumulated. And he said, wow, that was 3 months. If I had done that for, 4 times in a year, that would be like better than a starting salary at a if I went to college and took a more typical route. So I knew kind of then that I didn't think I wanted to go to college. My parents are both highly educated, both went to college, and were very skeptical they did at first. But then I went back to school. I was my junior year of high school, and it's still doing well throughout the whole year. It was a little bit less than the summer because I wasn't able to completely focus on it as much, but was still a fantastic experience at school selling watches and really honing kind of my skills online, learning how to sell these watches through the internet. So actually, believe it or not, the end of my junior year was COVID. So I went home for COVID and had a pretty interesting dilemma my parents set out in front of me, which was, they were very concerned about COVID and thought that, either I could, stop going to the street to New York City to sell watches because I was seeing a lot of people, and effectively, halt a large part of my business, or I could move out, pay my own rent, and be my own person. And that was a very daunting decision to have at 17. The business meant so much to me, and I didn't feel like I could give it up. So I ended up moving out to an apartment in Connecticut when I was 17, finishing up school. I was able to graduate early, which was fantastic, and kind of jumped into the world of doing this on a truly full-time scale. I was going to the city every day, doing really, really well. I was very lucky to be pretty naturally gifted, as well as a hard worker in the company, and had a fantastic ride to be able to make a good amount of capital. And then eventually, when I was 18, I moved out to Los Angeles, kind of on a whim, mostly because of the weather. I realized that I had a good bit of seasonal depression, and that LA helped calm some of those nerves. So I moved out to Los Angeles when I was 18. And probably a year after that, was able to accumulate the inventory, and we had been doing really, really well, better than I had ever expected, and opened up our showroom, and now have our showroom in kind of West Hollywood, Beverly Hills area, and have been here for ever since. Thankfully, we've been able to accumulate, over a half dozen employees and some incredible clients, and been able to offer, a ton of really fantastic watches. So it's been a wild ride, but I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, that's really incredible. It's very much, the entrepreneurship story where you grew it to proof of concept. Now I'm sure your parents are far less skeptical, I'd imagine. And you said your dad still wears a Timex. My father always wore a Casio calculator watch, but I have since gotten that off of his wrist. I gifted him a date just for his 75th. Have you ever given your dad a watch, a better watch?
I have given him, funny enough, I've given him a date just. Actually a really great one, a 16,000 reference, smooth bezel with a blue Buckley dial, white hands. It's a great watch, actually. But I catch him whenever I see him. He's taking off his Timex, putting on the watch in front of me. My dad works in the theater Broadway industry for his whole life, and loves that the Indiglow on his Timex lights up in the theater. So I definitely I have given him actually probably multiple watches now, but he still loves his Timex with the glows in the dark, which I unfortunately cannot argue with too much. So I'll let him be him. But he calls his Blue Buckley his lucky watch. So that's
So he certainly appreciates them.
for sure.
Now, a lot of people say I have a pretty interesting name. You take that up a notch, but yet your business is not, it has nothing to do with your name. How did you decide on the Oliver and Clarke name? Was that something you established early on, or
It is not an exciting story, unfortunately. So this was even before I'd started the business, before I'd bought any watches, thinking of a name for the company. And I knew I kind of wanted to do something with two names. I thought it sounded kind of analog and grandfathered in, and gave a kind of a nice feel to a nice old world feel to a truly burgeoning company. And 2 weeks before I started the company, my dog died. His name was Oliver. So I knew I wanted to do that. And then I probably went through 100 secondary names. Clarke sounded good. I don't know any Clarks, unfortunately. And thankfully the domain name was open, and the website and the Instagram. So it all kind of clicked together. And at that point, I was of the assumption that whatever name I pick, I have to be the one to give it the cachet. The cachet doesn't just come from the name; it comes from the company behind it. So I was less concerned on picking the perfect name, and rather than just picking a name and moving forward. I'm a big proponent of just one step in front of the other, and that was kind of my thought process even back then.
Very cool. Yeah, because it's not something with like watch or something super on the nose and obvious. So I always wondered about that. And I guess want to close here with just some of your personal interests. I think one of the things that I found most interesting while chatting with you when we first met is that you are a genuine watch enthusiast. A lot of the younger guys who are getting interested in watches might come to it just because of the financial asset side. They hear that something trades on the open market for 3, 4, 5x retail, or that these things can be quote unquote investments, and they get interested in it, in watches in the same way that they might be interested in crypto or something like that. But when we were chatting about favorite models and stuff, I found that you have a really far much more diverse taste than even what people might glean from looking at your website. Imagine nothing was worth any money, so it's just about what you love and what's out there. Do you have a particular favorite brand or singular watch even that you would be on your wrist every day?
So I'm going to give you two answers to that. One is my favorite watch that I've owned, and actually you guys wrote a pretty interesting article about it, which is Movado M95s. To me, they're the most incredible, underrated chronographs in the world. I believe that if Movado was held in higher regard as a modern brand, that many of these would be worth well into the 60s. Unfortunately, because of their kind of modern woes, they are truly underappreciated, although they've gained some appreciation in the last few years. So Movado M95s, the ones in the kind of the Tati Tandi Bourgel cases with the 1463S pushers, those are kind of unbeatable. And then in that same realm, if you wanted to go full grail watch, I would pick I said this before, but I would pick a Patek 1563, which is a 1463, which is their iconic waterproof chronograph. But I would want it in this special variation. They only made 3 of them, and it is a split second 1463 with lumen. The particular one I want would be sold at Christie's a number of years back for, I believe, well, $7 figures. And it was a split second 1563 with luminous Breguet numerals, not in the traditional sense of metal Breguet numerals with lume cloth behind them, but the actual Breguet numerals were made out of lume, radium. And that to me is one of the most interesting watches ever. It is very expensive. I probably will never own it, but it is truly magnificent. So that's my answer. But I have a very diverse taste. I like I'm a big fan of 40s and 50s gilt chronographs, multi-scale stuff. I care much more about kind of the aesthetic, the aesthetic value and the charm of a lot of these vintage watches far outweighs the actual monetary value. To me, what I put on my wrist has much more to do with what I want to look at every day, and much less to do with what it's worth. So
Yeah, good stuff. I mean, no one who is only interested in watches for resale value says the name Movado, period, in these days. But you're absolutely right. Some of the back catalog is truly gorgeous, underrated stuff, and some really funky designs. I mean, the brand has always done design well, and that, even remains true to this day, although I personally feel slightly less true, and it's just kind of become the museum watch. But yeah, exactly what you mentioned. Vintage Movado chronos are gorgeous. Now, I guess, where can people find you? You've got a showroom in LA. Is it open to the public? Can people make an appointment? Instagram, social
our
media?
showroom is by appointment only at the moment. So you're welcome to go to our link tree to our Instagram. You can make an appointment. We are actually updating the website somewhat soon, so that you'll be able to do that through the website. You can find us at oliverandclarke.com. That is Clarke with an E, and as well on all social media. So if you want to find me, my Instagram is just my name, Linden Lazaraus. So for sure.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's always great chatting with you. As you are a short drive over from me, let's definitely grab lunch soon. And we'll have to have you back on the podcast to learn more about kind of what you're into and, what you're seeing that other people are into these days, because your perspective as a dealer is far different than someone like myself who largely works on the media side. So, Linden, thank you so much for joining us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ripley.
Have a good one.